Good afternoon and thank you so much for joining us. Thank God it's Friday. Let's talk some business. These are the stories we're tracking for you at this time. Dangote Refinery to begin production of petrol production test run. Yes, at the moment, as Oando acquires 100% stake in Ajip for $783 million. Shares holds their record high with Powell in focus. Well, on our first segment of the show today, we will stay with the recurrent petrol scarcity in the country. The NNPC says no cause for alarm, but the product is not available as it used to be. Motorists and other users of petrol have to spend hours in long queues at filling stations to get the product. How is it like in your locality? Let's dig deep into the possible cause of this challenge and profile possible solutions. And on the flip side of the show, manufacturers are reacting to the challenges and militating business growth across the country. The association, that's MAN, have expressed deep concerns over increasing stringent regulatory environments across the country, highlighting the heavy financial burdens these regulations impose on their businesses. We'll also get to the markets and see what the figures are looking like in the market to close the week. It promises to be interesting. Let's start with some news. Dangote Refinery, with a capacity of 650,000 barrels per day, is undergoing test runs for petrol, which full operation is expected by mid-September. Now, this was revealed by Reuters, quoting a note by industry monitor Energy. The $20 billion refinery, which has so far produced diesel and other distillate fuels, had earlier said that petrol deliveries from the refinery would start in July. According to the Industrial Info resource, there is a possibility for further extensions, but the refinery may end Europe to Africa's fuel trade and reduce Nigeria's reliance on imported refined products. Well, staying in the energy space, Nigeria's multinational energy company, Oando, has acquired 100% interest in Nigeria's Ajip Oil Company Limited, a company from ENI, an Italian energy company, at $783 million. Group Chief Executive Officer of Oando, Mr. Wale Tinumbu, disclosed this in a notification sent to the Nigerian Stock Exchange in Lagos. The Group Chief Executive Officer said the transaction's total amount consisted of assets, considerations, and reimbursement. He noted that the acquisition is a significant milestone in Oando's long-term strategy to expand its upstream operations and strengthen its position in Nigeria's oil and gas sector. According to him, the transaction increased Oando's current participating interest in OML 60, 61, 62, and 63 by 20 to 40%. The Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited has blamed the fuel scarcity that has led to long queues in filling stations nationwide, saying that's due to rains, lightnings, and thunderstorms. Well, NNPCL's Vice President Downstream, Mr. Dakmo Shegun, disclosed this at a press conference at the NNPC Towers in Abuja. But fuel queues have resurfaced at filling stations across the country. Car owners spending long hours in queues. Black marketers are having a field day, with fuel now being sold for as much as more than 1,000 naira in some cases. Apologizing to Nigerians for the queues springing up across the country and noting that the NNPC will not like to make excuses, Mr. Shegun said the recent weather hampered the sufficient distribution of fuel supply across the country, which is beyond the control of the corporation, but assured that all will be done to manage the situation. On the other side, the Independent Petroleum Marketers Association of Nigeria have raised concern over shortage of premium motor spirit, that's petrol again, affecting their members across the country amidst widespread scarcity. The umbrella body, which boasts of over 3,000 members and controls a significant share in Nigeria's filling stations, also accused the NNPCL of failing to supply adequate products to its members. My guest is a partner, Commercial and Energy Law Practice Scandal, Mr. Israel Aye. Thank you so much. It's good to have you on the show. It's been a while, Mr. Israel Aye. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much for having me, Tolu. It's been a while, but I'm happy to be here.
Well, I think it's great to start with fuel scarcity, what we face now, and it's almost becoming a regular occurrence. It's week in, week out. We see long queues at filling stations. One excuse or the other. Is it a downstream challenge? Is it a movement supply issues? Can you help us make sense of this sad development? Regulators and industry players are maintaining different positions.
Well, perhaps the only entity that can truly, I mean, they can tell us what is going on is the NMPC. Now, whether what they've said is all the story, some of the story we probably don't have a lot of telling at the moment. But effectively, what we're witnessing is just our inability as a country to diversify the supply channels or base for PMS. Again, you would agree with me that aviation fuel, diesel, and the likes of it is, I mean, the scarcity of those other commodities is not as recurring or reoccurring as the PMS. And that's because, in terms of petroleum products, the only entity that we have not to diversify the supply base is really PMS. And the reason is simple, is that PMS is essentially looked at, and maybe rightfully so, as just more than a commodity or just a commodity. It's really looked at as a utility. And, you know, deregulating it, especially the price, in order to incentivize other suppliers to come into the space and source those products and put in the market, has not been able to happen. You know, so you really have a sole or a single supplier for the product, and in those circumstances, if that single supplier catches a cold, then the system will sneeze. And like you said, it ranges from if they have credit issues with their own suppliers, if they have logistics issues, any variety of issues. If they have just simply efficiency issues, you know, it will immediately impact the market.
This is a fallout of the regulation process which we've started. Let's get back to the Petroleum Industry Act. I believe the implementation has started, but with the present situation, I would ask this. Do you think the set targets can be met?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last thing you said. If I think?
Do you think the set targets would be met? We know that the PIA tends to attract investment, tends to open up the market. With all of this challenge that we face at this time, FX issues, marketers not wanting to import, do you think the set targets will be met?
Good question, Tolu. And I'm very broad as well, to be honest. But maybe one of the things we need to settle is that no piece of legislation is going to solve problem. You need a combination of the regulation of legislation, policy, regulations, and just a framework essentially in order to solve the problem. So the Petroleum Industry Act, as the sort of comprehensive or global piece of legislation for the petroleum industry, upstream, midstream, and downstream, is in place. So what that has done is that it has hopefully established a basis, a statutory basis for doing business in that space. But again, you need to fill and plug the gaps with policies across the way. So the basis for the deregulation, I mean, for example, the Petroleum Industry Act envisages, or as a matter of fact, assumes that the downstream, including the PMS, will be deregulated. Okay. But a condition precedent for the deregulation of any market is, in fact, they're taking away price control. Okay, taking away price control and allowing private players to be able to come in, creating a competitive environment for it to happen. But that hasn't happened, and that's a policy issue. It's not a statutory issue. The statute is in place, but you and I know that because of the history and the fact that we just haven't been able to solve a lot of the socio-economic and political problems, you know, tweaking or just removing. I mean, in fact, the extent to which we have tampered with or tinkered with the price of petroleum products, you've seen the knock-on effect on the rest of the economy. So, indeed, the decision makers, the policy makers would need to sort of take a step back and look at the macroeconomic issues and put policies in place that would look to optimize, different moving parts in order for the objectives that were envisaged at the point of making legislation would be achieved. I don't know if that answers your question, but in a nutshell, what I'm saying is that the piece of legislation in itself is not enough. You can't say that there are no targets in legislation. It's just a boundary condition in legislation. It is by policy and by other means of executive actions that you can set, those kinds of targets, maybe development planning, development agenda, and on and all of that. So that's probably the way to look at it. Maybe something that we can hold the current government to account is, what broadly speaking, what is its petroleum policy? What are this government's agenda in terms of the upstream, the midstream, and downstream? I'm sure some pronouncements have been made, but those are the kinds of things we can hold on and ask the question: are those being met? And what are the blockers? How can we take them out to get to that place?
Let's stay with the crude oil market now itself. Production in Nigeria, we see that we are yet to even meet up with OPEC's quota, doing about 1,002, 1,003 condensate and all of that. And everyone is talking about ramping up production, which is very important at this time. But my question to you would be, do you think increased production would help address some of these challenges? Maybe we'll be able to give all of the local refineries crude to process.
Okay, so again, very good question if you ask me, and especially in terms of the linkages you have tried to establish, which is, the linkage between crude production and expanding local capacity for local refining as a basis, perhaps, for diversifying the supply base for the various sort of petroleum product streams. Remember, we've said that for diesel, for aviation fuel, and the likes, those have been deregulated, and you probably don't hear so much about scarcity and the likes of it. But PMS has remained a very big socio-economic and political hot topic. But your question is, what should we be tweaking or tinkering with in order to earn more foreign exchange, feed the local refining capacity, reduce our dependence on imported products? Again, whether or not we should be looking to even do that is a separate conversation. And then there's an absolute numbers game. There is no avoiding the fact that in order for us to be able to achieve these objectives, we need to grow crude production. And there's been talk about increasing, and I believe it is part of this government's agenda to increase production to the levels of 3 million and 4 million and the likes of it, which is over and above our OPEC quota. But the good part about meeting the OPEC quota at the very minimum is that we can resource foreign exchange, or we can earn foreign exchange with those, and then the increased production that can go into local refining, feeding the refineries and other sort of processing plants that are being, petrochemical plants that are being established locally, so that we can move, the value down stream to the midstream, to the downstream, and incentivize that. Now, how do we get there? We need to find a way to incentivize investment. Unfortunately, we haven't been very successful at that, and it is not this government's fault. It's been just a collective failure over several years. You could argue that some of the big IOCs really stopped investing in upstream Nigeria from as far back as 2012. So recounts have come down to very abysmal numbers. Sometimes you get 3. I'm hearing about 6 or 7. from hundreds to where we are. And so legislation is in place, like we already mentioned, but we probably need to do more than just legislation. The variety of headwinds that we're dealing with, the energy transition, there is, I mean, just about every producing region in the world is putting out assets and the likes of it. So we have to find ways to be very competitive. I was at one of the briefings that I believe the Upstream Commission held about the asset sale bid rounds that they were looking to do, and there were a lot of encouraging sounds coming from the CEO in terms of how they're looking at signature bonus and the likes of it these days. And we need to do more. That's probably the point I'm making. Effectively, unfortunately, those kinds of interventions or actions may not yield the results we're looking for immediately, but at least we should stop the slowdown and begin to reverse things. And in 5 to 10 years, hopefully we can get activities up. And it is only then that you can begin to really think and talk about how to feed local refining and progressively move things away from where they are.
All theft. You talked about the regulators now, the likes of the NUPRC, the likes of the NMDPRA and the NNPC, everyone coming together, the NSA's office, security agencies coming together. It seems like there's a deliberate effort this time to fight all theft. But some would also argue that all theft seems to be like an international crime because we're talking crude here. It's not just anyone that will go in there to try to rupture pipelines and all of that. But my question really will be, do you think that these efforts will make us move forward, at least in production? I'm worried about increasing production. But with all of these challenges, do you think we can move forward with production? 2 million is the target.
Well, I wouldn't even say 2 million is the target. Maybe for this year or for the next
12
months to 18 months, 2 million should be the target. But ultimately, honestly, I believe that we should be taking things north of 3 million until we get around the 4 million plus range. Is really when we are then transacting within our potential. And remember that within that envelope, you have anywhere between 2 to 2.5 million barrels to earn foreign exchange, which you need in order to be able to grow other sectors of the economy, make capital investments and the likes of it. And then you can afford to direct or redirect some of that volume to local refining and then begin to get into petroleum products and other forms of petroleum products, and where you're adding value and sending away and preparing essentially for the day when maybe crude may not be a hot commodity. So that sort of broad plan is something some of us have advocated and talked about for a bit. But again, crude theft as one of the should I say problems that we're encountering raises an interesting question. The question really is, our production levels down because of crude theft? The question I'm looking to ask is crude theft the cause or effect of the decline in production? And it probably is both. I would argue that, crude theft soared to the extent that it did when some of the big players stopped to invest and literally vacated those spaces. Nature abhors a vacuum. So people rushed into those places because in 2024, really and truly, there's so much technology, remote monitoring. There's so much technology to monitor those kinds of activities and eliminate it. But the reality is that in the absence of, ownership, particularly with big players and the likes of it, then it fell into the hands of those types of persons. And once they came in, and whether they're artisanal miners or part of the sort of organized international crime that we're alleging, then it became a cause. So I would say crude theft was first an effect of lack of investment and has now become a cause of lack of investment. It's not intractable. I believe that it can be dealt with the will to deal with it. So where are we? We're at the place now where particularly small producers would struggle to either get financing or get financing at a premium because of the factor of crude theft. So we need to deal with that for sure. There's been talk about publishing the names of, because again in 2024, money trails. I believe that if you make an example of one or two of these kinds of people, you will arrest it. We need to deal with that in order for especially independent producers to be able to access financing at the kinds of margins or percentages that make sense. So it's become a problem. Yes, we need to deal with it while continuing to tweak other aspects of investment promotion to be able to attract or incentivize investment in the upstream and midstream sectors of the Nigerian petroleum industry.
So let's wrap up this conversation with the outlook for the sector. There are global issues also affecting Nigeria's oil and gas industry. Even the Dangote refinery is expected to shape even the refining across the world. We've seen reports indicating that already. So what's your outlook for the entire crude oil market and even the refining space?
And that's truly the way to look at it, because firstly, we don't live in isolation and we're not in a bubble. There are local events that are confronting us, but then there are global effects that are also confronting us. Some of which include, like I said, the energy transition and the progressive and increasing defunding of particularly oil projects. Anybody today, just access to petroleum concession or license does not guarantee access to funds as it probably would in times past. Now, I am aware, at least we read, that there are efforts to create an energy bank. I think that's been agreed in principle. It's been put together. Where is that bank going to be resourcing its capital from? All those are things we should be dealing with. But apart from that, I honestly believe that there is some advocacy. There's some advocacy that producers from especially Africa can make to ensure that they're getting some funding, even if it's for gas projects. Some sort of priority funding for gas projects for a period to come. In order to be able to increase output in the petroleum industry, both oil and gas. But the reality is that we need the revenues from the petroleum sector to diversify away from petrol, in very much the way we are seeing the Gulf states do. If you watch what is going on in places like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, you can see that they're investing heavily in the non-oil economy. So they're anticipating the day, sometime in the future, when petroleum may not be such a hot commodity as we know it today, but so they are earnestly investing in non-oil economies and looking to grow things. But we tend to vacillate from one extreme to the other. So some of the things you hear at times is, let's diversify. But you see, it's a natural resource. And natural resource is inherently trust. That's one of the ways I look at it. It's a divine trust that has been given to a generation. And almost like startup capital. So what's the guarantee that if you mismanage this, that you're going to be able to manage the next opportunity that you get? So time is not entirely out now, but it's running out fast. My contribution in that respect is to say we need to maximize the petroleum industry in terms of production, which is why I'm saying 2 million barrels is not showing enough ambition. And I'm not being unrealistic. I can understand 2 million barrels within the next 12 to 24 months and the likes of it. But a bold, ambitious statement is to set it at 3-4 million. and the goal is to earn sufficient forex, not only to fund our recurring expenditure, but to make capital expenditure and to invest in the non-oil economy. And to have clarity in terms of where we're going, i.e. anticipating, sometime in 20, 30, 40, whatever sort of time in the future, that oil will not be a big forex earner for us. And then we would have invested in also local refining and processing capacity for both oil, petrochemicals, gas, and the likes of it. So when that day comes and oil is not a hot commodity, then we can consume a lot of what is produced internally, create products we can take to the international market, and create another economy. So that's a point to look at. And these things will take the time it takes. 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. But what would be helpful to hear is some conversation around what is going on. I'm sure people are thinking about it, but it will be nice for these conversations to be to be more open, to engage the public consciousness, so that even if we're suffering now, we would know that this suffering is only but for a short time, but sometime in the future, things are getting better.
Partner, Commercial and Energy Law Practice Conduct, Mr. Israeli, thank you so much for your time on the program. Do have a great weekend.
Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it. Have a great weekend.
All right, then. Coming up on the show, we'll now shift to understand challenges of